word is December 13th. I would say we have decent weather for December 13th. I'm pleased with the Lord is doing. um, as we are coming to this holiday season, we need to be mindful and cautious because we out of COVID, but we're not really out of COVID. So as we got family gathering, things going and stuff, just keep remembering, try to wash your hands and be mindful of what's going on because we don't need to go back to another pandemic. So let's be mindful, trying to take care of ourselves. I know some people have been dealing with some of the flu bugs, stomach bugs, stuff like that. So it happens as weather changes and so forth. The cold increases our chances of getting sick. It doesn't make us sick, but it just increases our chances. So let's just be mindful. As we are coming to this holiday season, let's also be mindful of scammers out there. 'Tis the season to scam. So they're calling you about credit card stuff, this, that, whatever. Your credit card companies and so forth should not have to get that information over the phone from you. I remember somebody did call and scam me, and they said, well, we're your cable provider, but will you confirm who your provider is? I was like, well, if you're my provider, you should know who you are. You got my name and my number, then you should know who you are. So there's a lot of scammers out there. They put a lot of energy and a lot of time into scamming, and people are good. I'm gonna tell you some of the I think it was Medicaid or Medicare calls I got. I was like, if I was on it, I would have believed it. And I was like, I'm not even on it. I was like, you telling me? I got important information about your Medicare. And I was like, I don't have it. So just be mindful out there. How does anybody start shopping yet for? I know this isn't our reason for the season, but it is our culture. We do buy gifts. Does anybody start shopping? Anybody done? The person who's done shopping, if you want, just type it in there and shame us all. Somebody will say I'm done because I can buy it.
Right there,
I'm
that's
done.
me. I'll be done.
Yeah, but I haven't really even thought about it, but it's coming. Now we do have. I will say this too, and I got to check the paper out front. We do have families that we are trying to provide for this Christmas season. Some people that are in need. One family had a fire, and we want to assist those families. So once again, that item is downstairs when you first walk in. If you haven't been a part of that, you want to, you can. Also, I know there was some gift cards, so even if you didn't want to, so to speak, go shopping and get something, there were gift cards on there as well that we can give to those families and they can go and purchase things later as well. So let's be mindful of that. Also, I'm just going to say, pray for, well, I got to be careful. Never mind. I was going to say pray for somebody because they're going out of town, but I don't want to tell people they're out of town. Somebody robbed their house. So I'll say this. Just pray for some of our folks that have to go out of town. Had to go out of town. There's a family situation where their aunt broke their hip. And we have another family that I recently found out their mother broke her hip and has to have replacement surgery and all those things. So let's just continue to pray for one another. There's so many things going on in life, but some things really can hit us. So let's be mindful. These are temporary or light afflictions, but God has something still greater for us. So don't let it get you down. Let's just keep moving. We're gonna make it through. We're gonna get through. We're gonna find a way. Let me see, what else was it about the holidays? I think that was about it about the holidays. So let's just be mindful of the giving that we want to do for some of those other families. And next year, we're going to hopefully look to do even more with Toys for Tots and some other things that we want to do. So we'll start that planning ahead of time as well. And we need to get back. We used to go to What's it, the Ronald McDonald House, I think it is that, help prepare food for the families. But when COVID hit, it kind of changed some stuff. So yeah, COVID slowed some things, changed some things, and we'll get back to it. All right. All right. God bless you. Good to see you that are online. Evangelist Neil, God bless you. Good to see you. Mr. Thompson, God bless you. Good to see you. And Evangelist Neil says she's almost done.
What?
Almost done. God bless you. God bless you. We're gonna have her be the resident church shopper. Some other people's stuff.
Amen.
Praise the Lord, Sister Serena. We pray you feeling better. Praise the Lord, Mr. Thompson. Evangelist Hill. Praise the Lord. God bless you. And Sister Word and Deacon Word. God bless you all. Good to see you on as well. All right, so we're gonna get ready to go to our Bible study, and we're going to go to our Bible study, and it's going to be, we're going to start off in Isaiah. We're going to start off in Isaiah is the main thing. We're going to go to Isaiah, and let's see here. Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7, we're going to look at verse number 4 and verse number 14. And we're coming to a time in the history of Israel where they are divided. You have the northern kingdom, which is Israel, and you have the southern kingdom, which is Judah. The southern kingdom, Judah, comes out of the line of David, therefore taking us into the line of Jesus Christ. So just so we understand that the context of the kingdom and who travels through that lineage as king. And as we come here to our text in Isaiah, the issue is that Israel and Judah are in civil war. So they're separated for a reason. They're not getting along. And as they are dealing with this civil war, Syria comes and joins in with Israel. Now, for a brief moment, Israel is ready to bring Judah in, and they want to form an alliance that would be Syria, Israel, and Judah. And the reason they want to do this is that Assyria is becoming a strong, fierce nation. And Assyria is coming through the land, and they are conquering. They're just coming in, conquering people. So as they are doing that, the smaller nations see like, hey, we can form an alliance, join together. But Judah is like, no, I don't like y'all don't like me, we're going to stay that way. So as Judah refuses them, Israel and Syria decide to team up on Judah, and then they're going to come in and attack Judah. So it's a whole bully situation, so forth. Ellen, do me a favor. If you see that, I think it's that very last slide that shows Judah and Israel. Judah and Israel as that map. If you throw that in for a second, let me have it for a little bit. I think it's 27 is the spot that it's going to. Yeah. I think I didn't pull it. Oh, yeah. This has got to go up. Bump that, if you can, bump it up a little bit. There we go. So we see Israel at the top, Judah at the bottom. They're not one complete nation, but they're separate because of civil war. So yes, of course, they're right by each other because they were one big nation. Now they're separated. And we're going to look at King Ahaz. Yeah. All right. So just leave it up for just a little bit, and then we go back to the regular thing, because I don't have the complete like I want. But oh yeah, that's courtesy of Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. So they're a wonderful site to go visit, check them out. They do wonderful work. But when we look at this, in Isaiah chapter 7, verse number 4, Isaiah 7, verse number 4, it says, sorry, I got to stand with Ukraine. I was click the wrong thing. Everybody's watching. That is a tip that they had in. Mine, I may have to. There we go. So I may have to. All right. All right. Isaiah chapter 7, verse number 4. He says, "And say unto him, take heed and be quiet. Fear not, neither be faint-hearted. For the two tails of these smoking firebrands," it's talking about Israel, the two tails, Israel and Syria, "for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria, and of the son of Remaliah." So then I want to go to verse number 14. "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." So I skipped a few verses, but I want to give you the text, the context of what's going on and happening. So we said that Judah's having trouble with Israel and Syria. Israel and Syria's having trouble with Assyria, and Judah's in the middle of this. And when we look at this, the King Ahaz is fearful of the fight that's coming his way. God sends him the prophet Isaiah, where we read in verse number 4, where he says, "Say unto him, take heed and be quiet and fear not." So God sends the king a word from the prophet Isaiah. He said, don't worry about this. Don't be fearful. He says, I know they're coming after you, but don't worry. And when he says this, King Ahaz is still troubled. Because even when we're going through things in life, even if in our prayer God speaks to us and say, oh, don't worry about it. You might feel soothed for a moment, but then when you get up the next day, you still got to go through it. You're like, I'm worried, but I'm trying not to worry. I'm trying not to worry. I'm at peace, kumbaya, God is great, but then now I got a problem. So the king, but what we begin to find out from the king is that God tells him not to worry. The prophet's speaking to him, and then the prophet says to him, do you want a sign? Do you want a sign? Do you want God to give you a sign? And he says no. Why do you think he said no? Anybody? He says no. Like, why would he say no? God says, I'll give you a sign, and he says no.
He already believes it.
He's faith, he's believing it, would you say?
That he already believes it.
He's already believes it. Okay. So it sounds, that's exactly what I think of when I first hear it. That this man is like, because he said, I don't need to test God, I don't need to try God. No, don't give me a sign. Now, interestingly, after he says no, the prophet tells him, basically, God said, oh, I'm going to give you a sign. And as I study this and look at you, I'm trying to figure out, okay, he says he doesn't want a sign. God says, I'm going to give him a sign. What is going on here? Huh?
He doesn't want to believe that it's going to happen. He doesn't want it confirmed.
I'm going to tell you what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. Well, let me go here. Let me set it up. We are in the 8th century. Jerusalem is in Judah. Judah and Israel are added. Judah has that southern capital that is Jerusalem. They're in the civil war. King Ahaz is feeling the threats that are going on. And his thoughts about the threats are not only for his safety, but he does mention and he does worry about the throne, the Davidic throne, the throne of David. I don't want another territory to come in and take over this throne, and then now we lose the line, the Davidic line. We lose the promise. We go back to the promise that's to Abraham. We lose the covenant. We lose all that's going to happen because of the war. Now, the kings that rise up against him, Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel, they began to attack the land. But before they attack the land, God says, I'll give you a sign. He says, I don't want a sign. And as we begin to read, the way I got to find out what's happening is I have to look at 2 Chronicles. I have to look at Kings, because this is where the actual story is. Isaiah is giving us the prophecy. But in 2 Chronicles 28:5, we're starting to get the story of what's happening. Ahaz, in the midst of the attack, he has his 2 sons that are killed. He has over 100,000 soldiers that die. Many of the Israelites who were living in Judah now are going to be taken into captivity. So what Ahaz does is he's no longer looking for God to give him a sign, looking for God to give him a promise, but Ahaz goes to the king of Assyria, the big bad bully, and says, I'm going to be with you. I will be your vassal, which means I'm going to be a king that's under you. You're going to be the king, and this is really going to be your territory. But I'm going to be here, and I'm going to run this. I'm going to support it. I'm going to give respect to you. And he says in the scripture too, he says, I will be your son. And that was common, that the head king was referred to as the father, and the kings under him were his sons. He said, I'm going to be your son. So what happens is he made up in his mind, I'm not going to God. I'm not waiting on God. I am trusting God. I'm going to Assyria. So now, if we backtrack and Isaiah's here and he says, God says, don't worry. Do you want a sign? No, I'm good. God said, well, I'm going to give you a sign. So now when we hear about the sign, this is when he talks to us about a virgin is going to give birth to a son, and they're going to call his name Emmanuel. Now, theologian Charles Spurgeon says that this is one of the hardest passages to decipher. And the reason is people begin to try to reconcile that when Ahaz is dealing with a situation right now, how can we be talking about the birth of Jesus that's going to happen like 700 years later? So then when we start to read here and he talks to us about this birth of Emmanuel, then some people would say it's a dual prophecy. That there's an Emmanuel that's born now, is born from a virgin, which really, when we look at translation, it means an unmarried woman. So he's going to be born from a woman that was unmarried, this, that, whatever, and all these things are going to happen. So what we're trying to reconcile, what's happening here? So when we look at this, King Ahaz makes his alliance with Assyria. And Assyria comes in after all the attacks that Ahaz has suffered. Judah, the lower kingdom, has suffered attacks from Assyria, has suffered the attacks from Israel. They lost, hundreds of thousands of men. And after all this is going on, they were not defeated. They were hurting, but not defeated. So now Assyria comes in, and at Damascus, they come in and begin to destroy Israel and Syria, destroy the enemy, push them out, and so forth. When Assyria comes into Damascus, Ahaz sees this altar that they have that's built to another god. What we discover about Ahaz is his father was faithful to God, but he was not. So Ahaz wants to duplicate this altar, and he sends plans to his priest Uriah to build an altar before he gets back from Damascus. When he returns, he makes sacrifices to the gods of Damascus. This is Judah. This is the king of Judah. He moved the altar of God, although he still planned to use it for guidance. He moves the altar of God and he offers sacrifices on the new altar. Now I get this from 2 Kings chapter 16. This is where this is taking place. He removes the royal entryway of the temple. He removes the Sabbath canopy that's there. He cuts the temple furnishings into pieces. He shuts the door to the temple. He places the altar on the streets of Jerusalem and the high places for worshiping false gods. We see this in 2 Chronicles chapter 28. So Kings and Chronicles begins to help us get this idea, this picture of who Ahaz is, and why he links up with Assyria, who worships other gods and doesn't mind bringing that in and pushing God out. So Isaiah's message came. He said, fear not, because they're not going to take the throne. So now, when we begin to look at this, in order to understand why God is talking to King Ahaz about not worrying about Israel attacking, not worrying about Syria attacking, and they attacked. But God says, don't worry about it. And he talks to us about Emmanuel, the virgin birth. How does this help King Ahaz? Does anybody got an idea? How does this help King Ahaz? You came to me and you said, I'm about to get kicked out my house, and this is going on, that's going on. My wife left me, my dog spit on me, all this kind of stuff. I don't slop on me. And I said, you know what? Jesus was born in the manger. You know what? Yeah. But I got a whole lot of other problems right now. Jesus was born in a manger. So, in order for us to get an understanding of what's going on here, and I told you, the challenge of this text is we're looking at this, trying to look to see why some people are saying that there's a birth of another Emmanuel. There's a birth, or I've even heard people talk about and the belief of two messiahs, and it's interesting, but there's a lot of talk out there trying to explain. It's dual prophecy. It was a prophecy for the time, but it's also a prophecy for the future. So when we begin to look at all of this, we look at verse 7 and 14 in Isaiah 7 and 14, and he says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. So God tells him, don't fear, don't worry, I'm going to give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So now, if we're going to look at the context, we got to look at more of what Isaiah is prophesying about what's happening. And if we go to the isolation, we must not be worried about it. He promised him Emmanuel. He promised him a son. So in verse 14, he talks about the birth. Now in verse 8 and 8, Isaiah chapter 8 and 8, he says, and he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and stretch out of the wings, shall feel the breath of thy land, O Emmanuel. So now he says that he is going to possess the land. So Emmanuel is going to possess the land. If we go further and we look at chapter 8, verse number 10, he says, take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. So he tells us that he is going to possess the land. He's going to get rid of the opponents, those that are coming. And then in verse number 9, chapter 9, verse number 1, he says, nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. So I want you to see here, as Isaiah keeps talking about Emmanuel, he says that Emmanuel is the promised Emmanuel that we find in chapter 7, verse 14. He's going to possess the land in Isaiah 8 and 8. In 8 and 10, he says he's going to get rid of the opponents. In chapter 9, verse number 1, he says he's going to appear in Galilee, and he's going to be of the Gentiles. He's going to appear in Galilee of the Gentiles. And then now we're going to go to verse number 2, and he's going to talk to us about as a great light to those that are in the valley of the shadow of death. He said, the people that walk in darkness have seen a great light. So he's talking about darkness, but he said, the people that walk in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them have the light shine. So this all sounds more and more like he's talking about Jesus. So he's not just talking about a child that's being born, just any old child or a child during that time. Isaiah 9 and 6 says, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. So this all is pointing to the divinity of Jesus, of who Jesus is. And the last one we're going to look at in Isaiah. So we looked at Isaiah chapter 7, Isaiah chapter 8. This is Isaiah chapter 9. He says, of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David. So he said, don't worry about David's throne. Of the increase of his government and the peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So I just want to clarify that when we're giving Emmanuel all of these qualities, it cannot be pointing to the birth of a child right then in Isaiah, at this time in the 8th century. Because once again, the issue, the complex is, how is he giving King Ahaz the resolution that there's going to be a baby that's going to be born that's going to help solve his problems? But he's talking about 700 years later, the birth of a baby. So as we look at this, it's 2 Kings, don't turn, I'm just going to read it real quick. 2 Kings 19 and 34, he says, for I will defend this city. This is God. He says, I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. So God has made the promise that he's defending that city of Judah. So the house of Judah, it will be attacked. The house of Judah will go into exile. And he says, I'm going to give you a sign. And this sign is going to come 700 years later. Emmanuel, God with us. So now, to continue to show that the birth of Jesus, when we get to Matthew, Matthew quotes from Isaiah. When Matthew writes in Matthew chapter 1, verses 22 and 23, and he begins to talk to us, he says, now all this was done, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken. So he's talking about the prophet. Spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is being interpreted, God with us. Matthew signs off on it. 700 years later, Matthew signs off. Yep, that's who he was talking about. He gives the promise of a Messiah 700 years later. So in your time of need, so now let's bring this to today. In your time of need, is God going to meet your needs? Because this book could possibly say, my answer may come 700 years later. That my issue is outdated. Does the Bible overlook the situation that I'm going through? Because if I'm looking at my real problem, I need a job. My marriage needs help. I got chronic pain and I'm suffering and I'm looking for an answer in this century, not the next century. But when we look at this, when we look at what happens here, God is telling him, I'm going to deal with the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that Ahaz is a sinner. That's his biggest problem. The root of the problem is the salvation he needs is not just from a kingdom, but he needs some answer for what his situation is with God. And what God is promising him is that I'm sending Jesus to deal with the root of the problem. And even though he comes 700 years, his blood that's on the cross deals with the root of the problem. Our problem is deeper than our economics. Our problem is deeper than our emotion. Our problem is deeper than our physical needs. The root of the problem is that he wants to transform us. He wants to save us. He doesn't want to just deliver us from a situation. And what he promised him, watch this, the promise, 700 years later. If he was worried about the throne of David being destroyed, God says 700 years, Jesus is coming. So the promise is it won't be destroyed. I need you to understand the promise is your situation is not going to destroy you. Your situation, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Oh yeah, you're going to deal with some things and you're going to struggle through some things, but God said, this is not going to destroy you. This is not going to take you out because I have a promise. And then now that was his promise, but now we have a promise. He said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. You have a promise. He says, my burdens are light, my yoke is easy. You have a promise. He says, I'm coming back again. You have a promise. So we have promises that we can stand on even if they don't deal with our situation right now. The promise is, I'll wipe all your tears away. The promise is the reward will be far greater than anything that you've gone through. The promise is these are but light afflictions. The promise is that God will supply all your needs. We have promises that don't necessarily pull us out of the situation, but if we have our hope in God, he's making the promise that when it's all said and done, all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord. He said it's all going to work out. It's all going to be beautiful. It's going to be wonderful. It's all going to be guaranteed because I said it. So despite how it looks, despite how it feels, despite you not seeing the total reward right now, rest assured there's going to come a day when it'll all be answered. It'll all be over in this way. And we'll have the victory. We'll have the victory. So we can't lose hope. We can't lose sight. We got to trust in what God is doing because, I spoke about this earlier, and I'll give a shout out to Bishop Lofton and Remnant Churches International. I was a speaker today for their Solemn Assembly, and I spoke about the repositioning for the kingdom was their theme. And I spoke about accepting the shift that comes from God. And what happens is, in our lives, God takes us to some uncomfortable situations, some uncomfortable places, because he's repositioning us. He's shifting us to something else. Abram has to leave. He's got to go, but he don't know where he's going. He had never been there before, but God said he wants him to leave his hometown. Moses goes from Pharaoh's luxury lifestyle to now go suffer with the people. But he's like, I'm going to use you to set all Israel free from Egypt and give you the laws and the commandments. We begin to see in Scripture, we see Saul at the time, who was a persecutor of Christians, but on the road to Damascus, God repositioned him and transforms his whole life. So the change is uncomfortable. The shift is uncomfortable. But God repositions us in order to align us with his will. And when he's speaking to Israel and he has the promises and the plan, God says, I'm married to the backslider. So no matter what happens, there's some promises that I'm keeping because this is the promise I made about your people. And now when we look at the saints of God and what God has promised, yes, we're going to make some mistakes. Yes, we're going to do some things wrong. But God says that he's committed to us. He's here for us. So I encourage you that as you journey through life, that you don't let your situation dictate the joy that God has for you. And that whatever we're facing and going through, God has a promise that he's delivering us from it. He has a promise that we're going to be victorious about it. Now, it may come 700 years later, but nonetheless, it's the promise. All right, any questions? Any questions about that? All right. All right, well, God bless you, everyone online. God bless you. Glad to have you with us. Pray that his word has blessed you. We have our Christmas caroling coming up this weekend, so be mindful. No, maybe I'm not going to say this. We got it coming up. I got to look at that.
Saturday the 16th.
Okay, this Saturday. Okay. Yeah, we got it coming up Saturday, so be mindful of that. If you got any questions, ask Lady Lisa Cummins about that. She can fill you in on that. All right, God bless you all.